Imagine paying the price of a luxury house for a single flower bulb, a tulip. In the 1600s, the Netherlands, one of the richest countries on earth, went completely mad for tulips. At the height of the craze, fortunes were made and lost overnight. Contracts for bulbs traded faster than money itself, and some of the rarest tulips were worth more than gold. But within months, it all collapsed. Prices crashed, lives were ruined, and history remembers it as the first recorded financial bubble. This is the story of Tulip Mania, how a flower triggered the world's first market crash. In finance, every rise has a reason, and every fall has a warning. Welcome to the stories that built and broke billion-dollar empires. Money creates legends and then destroys them. If you like to see how greed, risk, and power collide, you are in the right place. This is where we explore the real rise and fall of financial giants and what they teach us in the world we live in. Our story begins not in Holland but in the Ottoman Empire, modern-day Turkey. The tulip flower, with its bright colors and elegant petals, was prized by the Ottomans as a symbol of wealth and power. The name tulip itself comes from the Turkish word tulband, meaning turban, because its shape reminded people of one. In the mid-1500s, tulips bulbs were carried from Istanbul to Europe by traders and diplomats. One of the key figures was Ogia de Busbecq, a Flemish ambassador who sent tulip bulbs back to Vienna. From there, tulips spread across Europe, but no place embraced them quite like the Netherlands. Why Holland? Because the Dutch were already in love with gardening. They were masters of botany, trade, and wealth. A new flower, exotic and rare, was the perfect symbol for their growing empire. By the early 1600s, tulips were being cultivated across the Dutch Republic, but some tulips were not like the others. The real mania didn't come from ordinary tulips, it came from the broken tulips. These were flowers with striking streaks of color, flames, stripes, and feather-like patterns across their petals. To the Dutch elites, this looked almost like painted masterpieces of nature. What no one knew at the time was that broken tulips were actually infected with a virus carried by aphids. The virus weakened the plants but produced dazzling colors. Since the patterns could not be replicated on command, every broken tulip was rare. Collectors treated them like priceless works of art. One famous variety, the Semper Augustus, became legendary. With its white petals laced with deep crimson flames, it was so scarce that only a handful existed. The Dutch nobility and wealthy merchants started buying tulips not just for their gardens but as status symbols. Owning a rare tulip was like hanging a Rembrandt on your wall, and soon prices began to rise. At first, tulips were a luxury hobby for the rich, but in the early 1600s, something changed. Tulips became more than flowers, they became a form of money. Merchants, craftsmen, even farmers, people from all walks of life began trading tulip bulbs. The market moved beyond wealthy collectors into ordinary society. Bulbs were sold through contracts where buyers promised to pay a set price once the tulip bloomed. This allowed speculation, buying and selling rights to tulips that hadn't even grown yet. In other words, people were trading future tulips. It was easy money, Prices kept climbing. Someone who bought a bulb one week could sell it the next week for double the price. A carpenter could sell a single bulb and earn more than his yearly income. Stories spread of sailors, bakers, and blacksmiths striking it rich overnight. The Dutch Republic, already a global trade power, became obsessed with tulips. Coffee houses turned into tulip exchanges. Handshake sale deals worth small fortunes. And the rarest bulbs, like the Semper Augustus, were valued higher than houses along Amsterdam's canals. By the 1630s, Tulip Mania had reached its peak. Prices went from high to absurd. A single bulb of the Semper Augustus could sell for 10,000 guilders, enough to buy a mansion in Amsterdam complete with a courtyard and stables. Even ordinary tulip varieties were worth weeks of wages. Farmers traded their livestock, merchants sold their ships, and craftsmen gave up their tools, all for tulip bulbs. One famous record tells of a single bulb being exchanged for 4 oxen, 8 pigs, 12 sheep, 2 barrels of wine, 1 bed, and a suit of clothes. It was madness. The market was no longer about flowers. It was pure speculation. People didn't buy tulips because they loved them. They bought them because they believed someone else would pay more tomorrow. The Dutch called this wind handle or the wind trade because people were trading nothing but air. But like all bubbles, it couldn't last forever. In February 1637, the tulip market suddenly collapsed. It began at a routine tulip auction in Holland. The bidding started, but for the first time, no buyers stepped forward. Prices had simply become too high. Fear spread quickly. If tulips weren't selling today, maybe they wouldn't sell tomorrow either. Within this, confidence evaporated. Buyers vanished. Contracts became worthless, and the market that had seemed unstoppable came crashing down. Tulip prices fell by more than 90% in just weeks. Bulbs that once sold for thousands of guilders couldn't even fetch the price of an onion. People who had borrowed money to speculate were ruined. Some lost homes, businesses, even family savings. The mania was over. If this story is making you think differently about money, hit the like button. It really helps spread awareness. And don't forget to subscribe. We've got more rise and fall stories coming from Wall Street to the world. What happened next is debated. Some later writers claimed the crash destroyed the Dutch economy, but modern historians suggest that the damage, while painful, was not national bankruptcy. Yes, many individuals were ruined, especially middle-class speculators who had bet everything. But the Dutch Republic remained a wealthy nation, still leading in trade, art, and science. However, the tulip bubble left a deep scar in public memory. For centuries, it became the symbol of human greed and irrational markets. Pamphlets, plays, and sermons mocked the mania. One satirical print showed tulip traders as monkeys gambling their fortunes away. So, what can we learn from Tulip Mania? At its core, it was not really about flowers. It was about human behavior, about fear, greed, and the belief that prices only go up. Every bubble in history, from the South Sea bubble to the dot-com crash to cryptocurrency, follows the same pattern. An exciting new opportunity, rapid price growth, mass speculation, and finally, collapse. Tulip Mania reminds us that markets are not always rational. People can convince themselves that something, no matter how absurd, is worth infinite money. And when reality strikes, The crash is sudden and brutal. In the end, Tulip Mania was more than a story about flowers. It was about the human heart, our endless desire for wealth, our fear of missing out, and our tendency to believe the dream will last forever. The tulip still blooms today in Dutch fields, a symbol of beauty, but its history carries a warning. Even the most fragile thing can bring down empires of fortune, because when we trade dreams instead of reality, we are only buying the wind. Thanks for watching. The higher they rise, the harder they fall, and every story has a lesson. If this one opened your eyes, share it. Someone else might need to learn from it too. Stay sharp, stay curious, and remember, in finance, nothing lasts forever.